Welcome to the inaugural presentation program of the second year of the Iowa Files. The Iowa Files is a program put on by the West Des Moines Historical Society and the Friends Foundation of the West Des Moines Public Library, who also gives us this fantastic space and helps us set up chairs. So we love them dearly. Before we start, I have asked Mr. Busby to talk a little bit about some of the materials in the back that are available to everybody. So,
Mr. Busby, Gail, you're driving me crazy. My role is simple. I'm the author of the Littleton Brothers story in the Iowa History Journal. There are multiple copies just of the story itself, and the publisher sent over some complimentary issues of that, so if anyone didn't get one of those, that's available. And also there's something very neat back there. It's a special edition CD. It's a 5-song EP that Tom Woodruff, my chief creative mischief maker in history, and I put together. Chad Elliott is one of the greatest musicians here in the state of Iowa, and he wrote 4 songs based on the Littleton Brothers story. So this is a really neat collector's edition. It's $5. Every one of those $5 bills goes into supporting the continued preservation of the Littleton Brothers legacy. That's all it's for. The cost of the CDs was underwritten so that all the money comes back in to keep telling the story. And there's a lot of story left to tell, but Tom Woodruff has become a great friend in the 6-7 years since we met each other, and he told me about Littleton Brothers. But very simply, help yourself to copies of stories. If someone that you know of would be interested in the story, take an extra copy home, give it to them. I encourage you to get that CD. This is going to be the limited run, only pressing of this CD is going to be done. Chad Elliott is a really neat artist. If you need to, look him up and you'll see what I'm talking about. And West Des Moines Historical Society, I produce a weekly arts and culture radio program here. I will get any email addresses and share my newsletter. It's free. I don't share it with anyone, but it tells what is going on. I interview Gail on a regular basis about things that are happening historical around the area, across the state, authors on a national basis. So I talked more than you wanted me to. I'm sorry.
sit down.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, folks.
I am so mean. I'm sorry, I'm Gail Brubaker. I'm the Executive Director of the West Des Moines Historical Society. Some quick background and then we're going to get straight to the expert on the matter. Just a few years ago, the Littleton brothers of Louisa County were an unknown story. They were lost in time, this amazing piece of history that laid undiscovered, except for an amazing coincidence that Tom will talk about involving preserved memories from a family member. They're from the small town of Toolesboro in Louisa County in southeast Iowa. There are also some absolutely amazing Native American mounds, so well worth a visit to that part of our state. In fighting with Union forces, brothers Thomas, William, George, John, Kendall, and Noah all died from wounds, disease, or other calamities. This is the largest loss of life in one immediate family in any war in the United States history, even more than the Sullivan brothers during World War II, which we all learn about, but we don't learn about this family. Our presenter, Tom Woodruff, has really embraced with a great passion the story of the Littletons and is working tirelessly to preserve their memory and their names, because this is a really important part of Iowa history. And John Busby has been a tremendous partner. So with very little further ado, I would like to present Tom Woodruff.
Thank you, Gail.
You're welcome.
Okay.
I'm walking away.
Okay. Was there a football game up this way yesterday? I talked to the pastor who happens to live in the same retirement home that I do this morning, and I told him I was going to be over here. And he gave me a message for you. He said, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep." I thought that was a perfect introduction to come to here with. Okay, so This morning, some of us are rejoicing, some of us are not. Well, Gail, again, thank you for inviting me today. This is really some kind of a story, and I really don't feel qualified to tell you the magnitude of this story. So if I don't convey that, it's not because of the story, but it's because of me and the way I present it. We'll go through the PowerPoint, and I think it'll tell you the main part of the story. We'll have questions following, and then I have 3 or 4 things that I sincerely want to share with you. So let's just get on with the PowerPoint. Now, I might tell you this. John and I have worked out a system. When I want him to change the PowerPoint, I wink at him. It don't mean a thing. No. You got that, John? He didn't know I was going to say that.
With my eyesight, you better give a big wave.
David, I do not need the mic, do I? Okay, fine. Well, let's get started with the program, and we'll go to slide number 1. We've titled this program Brothers in War. We've since put some other handles on it for other reasons, such as an 8-minute video that we've made. But this will tell the story, and I have to give you a special thanks to Rosalie Swanson, who turns out to be a relative of this nice lady in our audience, who was the grandmother of Olive Mary Kemp Carey, a local lady who collected clippings out of old newspapers for many, many years. Mrs. Swanson is not well, and she had to give up an old scrapbook. She called me from Raleigh, North Carolina, said, "I'm going to throw this book away." I said, "Oh, don't throw anything away. Of 57 pages, 4 columns of clippings that you took out of all the newspapers from the early 1800s to 1922. She sent them to me, and I found 2 brief articles about the Littleton family who had lost 6 sons in the Civil War. Littleton, we'd never heard of it in the county. Ed Bain, my co-worker on this, who's even older than I, went to his local librarian, Jan Haley, and Jan is a computer geek and all that, and she said, "Well, what if the correct name was Littleton, not Littleton, the old Scottish pronunciation?" We threw in Littleton, and let's see what comes up. In addition to that, we went to Leslie Schwam, a lady, a history professor at the University of Iowa. Some of you may have had courses from her. And my good friend Chuck here, Chuck, where are you at? There you are, right in front. Did you ever take a course under her? No. She taught spatially in women's studies. Lee Miller has since passed, but a great Civil War historians. Frank Best, Verl Leckwa, and John Carpenter, local people who really helped me with this story. They were in the newspaper business and a lot of other things. And then we were able, believe it or not, to locate some Littleton family members, none of who even had heard of these uncles, great uncles. Well, once we found them, I made a lot of phone calls over the United States, found these people, got some stories, we did a lot of crying over the phone when they found out about this. So we go back in the history. They came from Maryland, this pioneer family, James and Martha Littleton. They came to Iowa. They were married in 1827. They came to Iowa, arriving here in about 1840, and in Grandview Township, which is about the center part of our Louisa County, eastern part of the state. They had 6 sons and 4 daughters. It's just amazing that they would come to this part of the state. This locates where we are. Obviously, Iowa. We became a state in 1846. They began living in Grandview Township, Chuck, down where we built the Louisa generating station. You well remember that, don't you? Okay, so they moved in the Grandview area. Okay, In 1853, they were living in a township between Wapello and Toolesboro along the Mississippi River. James was able to buy and own 200 acres of land. I'm still fascinated that someone from his background that we'll get into later was able to do that. And as far as we know, the 6 boys and the 4 girls worked on the family farm. The farm was 3 miles from where we're going to be showing you the dedication site of Toolesboro. Toolesboro was a very interesting town. We almost call it the gateway to southeast Iowa because Burris City, which was a town quickly sprung up at the mouth of the Iowa River and the Mississippi River, and they started building a railroad without a bridge across the Mississippi. They started to build the airline railroad westerly from Burris City, right at the junction of the Mississippi and Iowa. And so James, as far as we know, his farm provided the work and the income for the family in this area. We have to talk about Toolesboro. As I say, they had 2 distilleries, 3 mills. They had a lot of manufacturing. So the young men who grew up, the Littleton brothers, apparently had some kind of social life. And in that country, as Chuck well knows, you could either hunt or go fishing. Boy, it was hard to leave that county for me personally. Burris City, it grew up in the spring of 1858, a couple of miles from where these commemorative to these boys have been built, and it grew to about 1,000. It couldn't have been built in a worse place. And they had constructed over 100 buildings. It was a dream of a guy by the name of R.D. Burris, who's now buried out at the fork of the Mississippi River and the Marias River in Montana. Indians killed him there, and they probably got a big stone up for him. As you know, 1850 to 60 was a decade of political turmoil. Obviously, Lincoln was sworn in, Fort Sumter was attacked, and the war between the states started. This ad is really something. I wish we could spend more time on it, but I won't. But there were really a difference in whether you were single or married or the color of your skin. But they were really recruiting people at that time. The 6 sons of James and Martha Littleton were quick to volunteer for the service. A little memory of that war. You can read them, the Americans that died, combined in combat. 10% of all the northern males that were involved in that war died. 30% of the southern males. That was a terrible war. Okay. James and Martha Littleton did not live to see their sons die. And the 4 girls that we're tracking down, we believe went to foster homes. Some were married. Some of the married girls had husbands in the war. But in 1853, Martha passed away, and James died in 1860. A little footnote. In those 3 years between Martha's death and James, the father of these boys, he was married 2 additional times. Both of these people were buried in a potter's timber cemetery. That's a long story I won't get into. Thomas Littleton, obviously from Toolesboro. He enlisted as a private, mustered into the 5th Iowa Infantry. He was wounded at this battle in Mississippi. And by the way, my wife and I have visited every one of these sites, except the one in Georgia. We weren't able to we had been there earlier, but we didn't make it. But again, Thomas was captured at Mason Ridge and sent to Andersonville Prison. All of you have probably read about Andersonville Prison. Okay. It was a hellhole. I won't go through all this, but I've read a lot about it, seen pictures. Let's go on to the next slide. Thomas is buried there, and I've talked to the curator there. He was good enough to send me these pictures and a lot of stories about it that I had not read. So we do have an official photo of his burial there at Andersonville. Henry Wirtz, I saw a play specifically about this, who was the only, I believe, war person hanged. And because of the way he treated people in Andersonville, and many of you have read about that, so you know what happened to Henry. William Littleton, born there, he was wounded early on at the Battle of Shiloh. How many of you have been to Shiloh? Sure, a number of you. But he was in that hornet's nest, and if you've seen that sight, but he was wounded enough that he got out of there before they really were overtaken. So he was able to continue on through battles at Vicksburg and Jackson. But he died, he got contracted disease. They took him up to Benton Barracks in St. Louis, where he died and where he's buried. John Littleton. John was the only one married, as far as we know, of these 6 brothers. His wife and daughter both died. Their daughter was 18 months old when she died, and the mother died about the same time, and she is buried. We actually have the stone in the Wapello Cemetery where she's buried among some very fine people. Her gravestone is just marvelous, and I always wondered who bought a tombstone like that, because they were poor. But anyway, John ended up in Prairie Grove. Have any of you been to Prairie Grove? That's the most well-preserved battlefield, they say, in the Civil War. It's the most original, and it's original. Nothing's changed much there. But he was very badly wounded, and he died at, they took him up to Fayetteville where he died, and that's where he's buried. Among 800 soldiers up there, no particular spot, a big grave. Noah, he was mustered in the same infantry group, bought at Prairie Grove, but he was the only one of the 3 Littleton brothers. 2 died there. We'll get to the 3rd one sooner. Noah escaped, and several months later, while in the area of Forsyth, Missouri, he had crossed the White River to forage and get food. And coming back across the river, we have some very descriptive first-hand accounts of how he drowned. Okay. Kendall. He was killed in the Battle of Prairie Grove, and he was buried to the right under you can still see the imprecation where apples were blooming when my wife and I were there, and you can still see that long, shallow evidence of that pit there. So he was buried, he was just left there. Tough place to visit. George Littleton. George was the oldest. We know less about him than anybody else, but he enlisted in with a buddy over in Illinois. They ended up in Harper's Ferry, where he was captured. He was terribly sick. They brought him back to Chicago. He was discharged with disease, and he died soon after. We don't know the exact date, but records show that he did die soon after, and we think he's buried, we don't know where, in Potter's Cemetery, which is a little family cemetery nearby there, and on the old farm they owned. Looking for family. This was a treat. Can you imagine finding local families who had this heritage? And these are from primarily Illinois and Iowa. And we had a memorial service the day we dedicated the, no, I'll take this back. We were at the Wapello Cemetery, and our featured guest that day was Representative Tom Sands, who worked with us a great deal on getting funding and so forth. And they presented quite a nice certification or a certificate to the audience that day and to us. we can skip this. My friend Ed Page is persistent. We're such good friends. Okay, we can move on. If you go to this site, you'll see a Toolesboro Mounds, which has been there forever on the Great River Road, right in Toolesboro. I went to the county when we found this story and I said, we've got to have a spot to recognize these boys, and they were so on board with this. It's the advantage of living in a small county of 14,000 people. And they gave us a site right in front along the Great River Road of a swampy spot where they had a borrow pit, and they said, if you can use it, and I said, we'll use it. But it happens to be right in front of these mounds. And that's where we built the memorial. We probably don't have a lot of slides about that, but you can pick up the literature. This is very interesting. The Littletons are listed as white in the '56 census. Listed as mulatto a little later. And it's very possible that men of mixed blood served in white regiments. I've gone over this with many, many people, including Dr. Schwam at the University of Iowa. She's not comfortable. The family is not comfortable because their heritage is Indian. But I'm not going into all that, although I know a lot more than I'm going to tell you. That's for another book.
That was the end of the slideshow.
That's the end of it? Okay, I'll take it from here. It took us about 4 or 5 years we had the site to get the place built. I had met John, and so we began to plot how we could get this, and he, with his connections here in Des Moines, was able to get some very helpful people. The governor's wife to do the financial kickoff, and acquaintance with people here in Des Moines who had access to different funding here. Getting $250,000 out of Louisa County, well, you don't do it. So we had to rely on a lot of help. Although many, many people did come through with some $5,000 checks, we were able, they were so generous at this, that we were able to have enough money that we have set up an endowment called the Louisa County Historical Society Endowment, that there will be no funds ever used again of public money. That endowment now writes a check to the Board of Supervisors who are maintaining the site. There's some light bulbs out right now they aren't taken care of. But it's a beautiful site. I don't have a slide of it here, but it is in some of the cards on the table. So we got the site built. We're open for business. We're writing a book thanks to John's help. We are, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to open it to questions before I get into the 3 or 4 things that are being planned for the site. But does anybody have a question about what I've said or what you couldn't hear? Yes?
Yeah, the Toolesboro, that on the Great River Road, is that as you go down to St. Louis on the along the Mississippi?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we drive that way quite often. I don't remember seeing anything. Of course, we're looking for it, but we take a lot of side trips like that. And
Yes, it's worth the trip.
Next time.
Yeah, it's worth the trip just to see that monument. If you open that brochure, if you've got it, and read the description of that monument, you'll really appreciate it when you're there, what it all means. We've had a tremendously talented artist and designer involved in this. And when he presented this, and we had some congressmen there the day we decided on the monument, the family was overwhelmingly supportive of this. The whole shape, everything about that monument means something. And I can't remember all of it.
Tell them about the signage along Highway 61, which will direct people.
Yeah, okay. In Toolesboro on Route 99 on the Great River Road, right in this little town that you drive through without knowing you're there. It sits along the county road on 3/4 of an acre. And there's duplicate signs there advertising both the Indian mounds the Hopewell Indians, 400 BC, and our site. So it makes a great twofer. The Indian Mounds facility are not open. They have a little shack there, but it's not open regularly, but they do try to maintain it.
Do you have any idea why their story got lost? Is that because nobody
Well-
was around or what? This is significant and yet it hasn't been told.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you why, but mother and father are gone. Their backgrounds are questionable. Sisters are in no condition to do anything. And all of you know enough about the Civil War to know that there really weren't hospitalization communication techniques set up during that period. And I have some other reasons related to how they got to the county that made it difficult for people there to talk about. I wish I could talk about that. But anyway, he was brought here by a very wealthy family who also brought, I can tell you this, happened to bring along a black lady who was like family. And then the Littleton family came. So it was a matter of just the death of all the family, the circumstances around them. Even the neighbor that owned the farm right beside it, who's the greatest historian in our county, didn't know the story. They didn't even know the tombstones were back there, but somebody had seen them. So a friend of mine and a lady climbed over the fences and went back there without permission and found these stones where the parents are buried. The owner has now said on limited, you come to me and talk to me, I'll let you go back there. He's a descendant of the family that brought them here. Long story. Okay, but anyway, the story was lost.
You said that some of the boys were born in Ohio. Do you know where? Because I know that.
If it were, I can't remember, but if we had that particular slide. By the way, they came, we believe, by caravan. There was quite a route back to Vandalia, Illinois from New Jersey at that time. I think it's Highway 40 now, that most people that came to Iowa traveled by caravan, by horse. Mm-hmm. But I can't remember the town, sorry about that.
Because I know there's a jump from Ohio to Iowa with a lot of people, including some of my relatives too, so I just wondered if...
So they did have a layover several years in Ohio. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're doing well on time, but a couple of things I want to pass on to you. One is that we have a nice endowment to keep this sign up forever. And we've got that in writing with the county, so it's going to be taken care of. We've been for 4 years attempting to get a White House visit by this family. And I'm going to tell you something that's very dear to me as a veteran. When you can bring a deserter to the White House, I think you can bring the family of 6 brothers lost to war. Enough said on that. We're going to continue our efforts to do everything we can to have annual events there. We're working with the VFW's people out of Burlington who have a little more size than we do to do something annually there. We really got to work harder on getting the site on the visitors and the tourist maps, but we're making headway. I mentioned the design of it. I think when you go there, anybody who visits that site now, it's absolutely beautiful. We've just had the family come in and do some very nice landscaping, native landscaping, right around the 6-sided perimeter. If you look at the picture of it, and I don't have a picture of it, we have 6 white stones scattered around the outside with oak trees planted at each white stone. The white stones are granite. I wanted white granite. The only place to find them was on the south shore of Lake Superior. A friend of mine got a hold of a guy up there, and the old guy heard about us wanting white boulders that weigh a ton, and he said, if you come and get them, you can have them. And we had the most beautiful 6 white stones by those trees in an arc around the main site with the boys' names engraved on it. And people are great when you talk to them about these. The other thing is the landscaping around the entry sign is just beautiful. The roses, the families. We had a meeting down there a few weeks ago. The family all come in and we upgraded the place, took care of the weeds. Great site to visit. Anything else? Yeah.
So Rosalie contacted you and gave you the scrapbook. And
Yes, she
that's
sent
how
it to
you
me.
found this, is just going through old
Grandma,
things.
you know how you pile grandma's stuff up. Don't throw anything away grandma gives you. She found that and she knew that I was managing, we did for 15 years, we gathered stories quarterly and published them through a magazine called Louisa's History. And so I was kind of looking after, our attempt in this magazine was to get stories from people who knew about the 20th century. Everybody knows about the 19th. So we were able to get almost 1,000 stories about Louisa County that we collected in this magazine. And that's how Rosalie happened. She was subscribing to the magazine, a descendant of the gal who got us the scrapbook. And we were able to make the connection, salvage this book, and it's provided a lot of other stories.
Oh, I'll bet. That's just what I was thinking. There's probably all kinds of.
Could you imagine in the mid-1870 or so, they'd write anything in the paper. I was embarrassed sometimes what they wrote in those. But it was, I took the original and put it in our historical society, and I made a copy that I carry.
Okay, good. So
It's-
the original is there.
It's in the
I'd
historical
have to-
society, you
I'll have
bet.
to make a trip.
Yes,
How close is the book to being published?
I'm sorry?
How close is the book to being published?
John, speak up. we talk about that a lot.
This has been kind of the energizing part of the Littleton Brothers project at this point. Tom asked if I would write a book about this story. I realized I was working with a crossword puzzle of indeterminate pieces, and maybe I had 40% of the pieces for this puzzle. And so my approach to this book is going to be an historic novel. So I'm going to take the pieces that we know and put them together and put together plausible story and character lines based on the history we can do. And what I'm honestly hoping for, especially when Tom, as the primary ambassador for the Littleton Brothers story, travels across the state and elsewhere, and I do my part, that more people start here in Iowa saying, wow, this is a neat story. You know, my great-great-great-uncle served in that same unit, and he took meticulous notes in his diary. And maybe in someone's family diary, we find a reference to one or more of the Littleton brothers. Or the Holy Grail, I would love to find a photograph. We do not have a photograph.
We only have one photograph.
One photograph of one sister from about 19 teens. It was a 4-generation photograph. And so that is the fascinating thing we're doing right now with this story. So I'm composing it as an historic novel, following the family as they migrate from Maryland up across the Cumberland Trail, is my guess, into southeastern Ohio, where they sunk roots long enough to have 3 more children. And then they eventually, in the late 1830s, completed their trek to Iowa. And I have a feeling that was right around the time where some of the land promotion finally caught on with James Littleton, and this possible benefactor that said, there's some great land in Iowa, let's go there. And the primary place to cross the Mississippi River was there in across from where Toolesboro is. So that's why all these things start falling together. Now the book will also have an appendix that will have all the facts that are there, references, so that, you know, I hope, in fact, I trust my abilities that the story will be captivating and fun reading, but it'll be based in history, inspired by type story. The facts part are maybe where someone out there will say, oh wait, yes, I do know that this is something maybe we can connect to. So we get this network growing so we can fill in those missing puzzle pieces, and that everyone who reads this story, everyone who finds out about the Littleton brothers can become part of the discovery process. In my mind, well, first I want to say, Tom is being a little too modest. Tom has been the chief motivator for this project. The endowment fund, not only does it guarantee that maintenance will be in perpetuity for this site, which does, it's an 11-foot tall obelisk, and the design is not an obelisk that comes up to a perfect point. It's chopped off in a ragged fashion as if life chopped off early in life. It's very symbolic, it's captivating. You saw the pictures on the postcards back there. And the artist did a fantastic job of making the vision become reality. The dedication happened in 2016, and the governor was there. Dr. Tom Moraine gave a wonderful presentation about this. So we had this dedication in the heat of the time, and we had about 150, 200 people there, despite the heat. So this is a fascinating story. But Tom wants to see this become one of those stories that's embraced by Iowa, just like the Sullivan brothers. And part of my theory with why it disappeared, why the death of 6 brothers would disappear from a family, I believe that the sisters were so grief-stricken, they made a pact amongst themselves to say, we cannot tell our children about this. I don't know, a little artistic license, but it's all plausible.
2 last things, and we'll let you go. One is that when we found this story, my first trip was to Waterloo to visit with everybody connected with the Sullivan brothers. And I said, we found this story, and I don't want to upstage you, because it's going to be easy to do. So I want your advice on what we can expect over the next few years as we develop there. And the fellow there was very good to us and understood, and so they've been on our email list of everything we do. So we are in touch. We know what they've done. The last point I want to make is that for 4 years also, maybe you've seen some editorials in the paper here, I've written every politician, including your mayor, a number of letters. When that courthouse gets named at your building, what should it not have on it? A politician. Why shouldn't it have the name of Littleton? That would be significant. So anybody, if you have any pull, and they'll be getting more letters.
I'll be hanging around also. I send out a weekly newsletter about the Culture Buzz, the radio show I do, which will include, of course, any updates on the novel as it gets done. It'll be months down the road because we're just starting the first round of edits and everything. Like I say, I want to have a very plausible story, which it is, and we'll see where this can go. A couple of years ago, I sent a letter and made sure it got to him, but Ken Burns knows about this story. And quite honestly, he said, there's not enough facts at this point. And of course, he bases his work on images. So he did the Civil War. He even provided an autographed copy of his Civil War DVD set as a fundraising benefit for us. But we're working. We need more people who know the story and can simply say, you know, next time I'm in Southeast Iowa, I better take the real River Road and just see about the Indian Mounds and then the Littleton Brothers Memorial.
We've got to get this book written. I'm tired of buying him coffee at the job house in Iowa. Thank you very much. It's been a great honor.